So as you can see, increasingly hitting the big 5-0 or the big 6-0 or the big 7-0 rather than being seen as a time for slowing down, detaching, sitting there in God's antechamber waiting for the end. More and more people are actually making themselves over in quite a fascinating and radical way. Our next example of this is Betty Krawczyk. She's an ex-con, a jailbird, and a raging granny who, far from mellowing as the years have worn on, is becoming ever more vocal, ever more active, ever more combative. Her most recent conviction was for strenuous anti-logging activity in the Clayoquot Sound and at Eagle Ridge Bluffs. Her most recent arrest was her 8th arrest, and she was arrested for refusing to obey a court order that instructed her to stay away. This is a woman who eats life. 3 husbands, 8 children, and is now planning to run for mayor of Vancouver. Where is Betty? Hello, my dear.
For this wonderful introduction, although I have a feeling it's a little bit scary to some people. I hope not. I want also to thank the volunteers that have been so wonderful to me through this entire program. It's just wonderful to have such people so friendly and so willing to drive you everywhere and bring you goodies and strive to please you. So I really appreciate that. But what I want to talk about is aging and what it means to be aged in such a young society. I'll be 80 in 6 weeks or so, and I thought a lot about age when I hit my early 60s. But to tell you the truth, I actually really don't think much about it anymore. I've sort of settled into the age that I am. And I'm finding that I'm at home in this age, and I really like this age, and there's a certain power comes with this age. There's a certain power in being an elder, and I think that elders have really been damaged by the society, and that 2/3 of the things that are wrong with the elders who are that are ailing is societal's disregard of them. In order to talk about being an elder woman, I have to first talk about my mother and how she handled being a grandmother. She was a typical, wonderful grandmother, earth mother. She had these huge gardens. She raised chickens. She sewed for everybody. She cooked for everybody. She took care of grandchildren. She was huge in the grandmother annuals of heroics. But I knew right away when I entered into my own grandmotherhood in my early 60s that mine was going to be sharply different. Because number one, this huge raising garden things and cookings, although some of us have got to get back to it if things keep happening in our culture, in our environmental culture. But I don't sew. I haven't kept chickens in a long time. And in fact, I don't think I've ever kept chickens. And anyway, I don't make music like my mother. She was a musician. She taught everybody music. I tap dance, but that's not the same thing. Grandchildren are not charmed by this. So, so there was this gulf here between me and my grandchildren that hadn't occurred between my mother and her grandchildren. So anyway, my grandchildren don't even live on this earth anyway. They live in cyberspace. They talk a different language. But what to do in this day and age with a grandmother who loves her grandchildren, and by extension, their friends, their neighbors, the children of the world. You're a grandmother, for heaven's sakes. You feel for all grandchildren everywhere. When the grandchildren are of a different kind of breed than what you remember is what grandchildren should be like, even though they at certain times very sweetly will let me know occasionally that they think I'm pretty cool, but it's pretty offhand. And so how do older women who are postmenopausal women who then graduate into real old age, how do we as citizens affect our communities, our province, our nation, who we feel is going the wrong way, for the good and the health of our children and grandchildren? How do we manage this? What do we do? So I had to think about this when I hit my early 60s, and I had to think about it because it was puzzling, and there were no models out there really that spoke to how I felt about the situation. So I went to the wilderness. I bought 10 acres on the west coast of the Clayoquot Sound, or of the Vancouver Island, which was the Clayoquot Sound, and I went out there. One of my sons built an A-frame for me, and I went out there to meditate and try to make sense out of growing old and what it meant. But what I found when I started exploring back into the sound, that I couldn't write anything because I was so disturbed by what I saw there, which was the clear cutting that was devastating vast portions of the Clayoquot Sound. This worried me. It worried me a great deal. What are we doing? Why are we cutting down all this magnificent old-growth forest? What for? For profit? Okay, but these trees belong to everybody. They belong to the world. They make oxygen. So in order to show you the spot that I was at this point, could we have the film that... it's a brief film. It was made by the National Film Board of Canada, and it's just a little snippet that told stories of old people. So this is me at the Clayoquot Sound at that time. Okay. When the weasel first scurried across the front deck of my cabin in the Clayoquot Sound, I knew it was a martin, and I thought it cute. But the second time it sacked my kitchen and ran out with a bag of vanilla wafers, I tried to whack it with a broom. Immediately, I knew I was being hypocritical. The martin belonged here. I was the interloper. And there was another issue. The moratorium on clear-cut logging had recently been lifted, and it would soon resume. I hated the way they cut the trees down, but I supported working people in unions. Now there were rumors of blockades. Stop the logging? Yes. But turn against my fellow unionists? I couldn't do it. That night, half dreaming, I heard an unfamiliar swooshing sound. With morning's light, I headed for the creek for fresh water, and then stopped, astonished. There wasn't any creek. At least half of our small cove was covered with mud, rocks, and tree stumps that had washed down from an old clear-cut up above, and the landslide was seeping into the sea, killing everything in its path. A muddy little animal tried for a moment to squirm away, and then lay motionless. When I turned the animal over with the stick, I saw it was a baby martin. Had this little creature been the recipient of my vanilla wafers? And where was its mother? Was my broom any different than a chainsaw? Early in the summer, I was among the first to join the mass blockades against clear-cut logging in Clayoquot Sound. And for that blockade, I spent 4.5 months in prison. Now, that was my first experience with prison, and there was some free time in the evenings. So as a writer, I thought, well, I'm just going to write about all of this. So I wrote the first draft of my first book on this subject. But it was my daughter, who is a medical anthropologist, who brought to my attention a theory that is raging now in the anthropological world called the grandmother hypothesis. And she said, read this, you'll relate to this. And as I started reading about this hypothesis, my heart leapt with joy, because it explained to me my own urges to help protect and provide and have some knowledge or some hope that my grandchildren and the grandchildren of the world would have something of a chance to live in a world that is not trashed by corporate structures, that is not full of illness and full of despair and depression. We have to have more time for connection between nature and society. We have to stop allowing corporate structure, the media, the governments to dictate to us what our human nature is, what it is we want from the world, what human beings are for. We're not here to consume mindlessly forever. That's not the goal of human life. We're here to celebrate life, to love life, to have more life, to know that when our environment is degraded, our social systems are going to be degraded. We have to love both of these. We have to protect both of these. We have to do it ourselves. I'm a great believer in peaceful civil disobedience. It has brought us everything that is valuable in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We can do this. People can do it. I have no faith anymore in the institutions of anything, but I have great faith in the power of people to love and to connect and to protect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Take a bow. Take a bow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Betty has not yet been hit by the disease of caution that seems to overcome so many politicians. She was asked what would be her program if she succeeded in this run for mayor of Vancouver, and she said, the first thing I would do is legalize pot.